You know, facing racism, discrimination, inequity has significant impacts on a person's mental health.
Totally. But only 1 in 3 Black adults who report needing mental health care actually receive it. I discussed this complex issue with author, speaker, and mental health advocate Richard Taylor Jr.
It feels like there are just so many barriers when it comes to seeking treatment for mental health concerns. What are some of the barriers that Black people in particular face?
We could talk about like socioeconomic disparities, right? And how a lot of the historical disparities, whether it's slavery, segregation, those play a part in it. And I think that those are very, very important. But if we're taking it from an internal aspect, the first things I think about are the taboo space. If we talk about a subject or show any kind of, emotion around what we're going through, we're labeled as being weak or, that's not something you talk about, right? So that what happens in this house stays in this house clause that we would hear, for a long time, depending on how people grew up, even from like a religious background, it's kind of like, oh, your faith should be enough. This should be strong enough. These are some of the more common things that I think that we have seen. And then even I think on the external side too, there is this disconnect when it comes to the idea of the lack of, Black mental health professionals in the field. And so that not being able to link individuals in that space.
Oh, it's huge. I think about just so many people, me included. I mean, trying to find someone is really difficult, and trying to find someone of color who has availability. Definitely. And then so many mental health care providers, don't take insurance anymore. So that's a barrier.
All of those combined, essentially what they do is they put us in this position to where we feel hopeless, right? And so we kind of just throw our hands up and we say, you know what, I'll keep sweeping it under the rug. I'll deal with it myself, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. So the stigma piece that you were talking about, I know you've been working on how do you break the stigma? What are some things we can do?
We need to be able to do the same thing that we would do with our physical health, which is make investments into it, right? And it's a thing of not waiting for things to happen, right? So my idea is this: let's be proactive rather than reactive, right? And so with our mental health, if we're taking the time ahead of time, one, to identify the fact that we have a mental health, it's not a bad thing. It's a part of our being, and it's actually a great part of our being. But then I think from there, after identifying, we can then move into a space of saying, what are some things that I can do to invest into it? This is how we start to break the stigma, because now what we've done is we've created a level playing ground in this idea that since we all have a mental health, maybe I need to take a step back, right? Because maybe I'm the individual who's a little toxic when it comes to not carrying a level of empathy for others who struggle, but also not realizing, i.e. COVID, all it takes is one situation. All it takes is one circumstance. And I can find myself definitely, if I'm vulnerable and susceptible, in a position to struggle with anxiety for the first time, or find myself dealing with depression or dealing with grief with the loss of family or friends. So I think what it does is that it puts us on this level playing ground to say, I'm no better than the next person. But then also for those people who have been quiet, who've had to live in silence, they're now in a position too to be like, wow, we're all the same.
I love that. That's beautiful. I'm going to remember that. I have a body, I have a brain. I'm going to take care of both.
There you go. I love it.
I'm hoping before you go, you can clear up one thing, because we've been hearing a lot about this in recent years about generational trauma. And what does racial trauma look like? How do you explain it? How do you explain the impact of racial trauma on Black Americans?
We talked earlier about historical disparities, right? But then if we looked at a lot of the historical happenings that have taken place, whether we're in the civil rights era or whether we go through slavery or segregation, and then when we see some of the things that we see in our society now, whether it, no matter what it is, I think it almost feels sometimes like it's a cycle repeating, right? It doesn't just hit us from a cycle standpoint. It's the after cycle standpoint that I'm really concerned about. It's the hopelessness that we discuss, feeling like some things will never change, right? It's the anxiety of what is going to happen when I walk out the house today. Am I going to have an experience with somebody? These different circumstances can start to cycle in our brain. And I think this is one of the major effects that we see, is that how it starts to change our mood, how we start to change ourselves, our identity, to fit in, to feel like we need to be accepted by, everybody, whatever the case might be. And in this, it can start to kind of put us in this position to where I think sometimes we aren't living in our true identity and true self. And because of that racial trauma, we find ourselves in this loophole that seems like almost impossible to get out of.
What you said felt so true for me. And the thing about racial trauma is it's the kind of trauma that isn't just one incident. Sometimes it's the cumulative of a bunch of incidents, and it can take a toll on our mental health.
It is so important to note there's help. We put 2 good resources here on the screen. You can also find these links on the New Day website.
Such important conversation. So glad that you had that one specifically. Yeah. Well, coming up next, we are checking in with 2 groups who are helping to celebrate the Black and queer communities through the arts. More on that when we come back.
This portion of New Day Northwest is sponsored by Primera Blue Cross.